Hey guys, it's your friend Kobe here and welcome to today's video. In this one we're going to be talking about the gender pay gap. I know this can be a really controversial topic, so I've done my very best to research from accredited universities, top publications, and top research groups. My goal is not to place blame on anyone or say anyone is bad. My goal is more to help myself learn about the gender pay gap and help anyone who watches this video better understand what the gender pay gap is, how big it is, why it exists, why we should care about it, and what we can do about it. Understanding all the aspects of the gender pay gap is really difficult because it's a really nuanced topic. But my hope is that by the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of it and its effect on you. So if you appreciate all the effort and time that goes into researching a video like this, please consider giving this video a like, as it tells YouTube that more people should see this video. And if you like videos about business, finance, entrepreneurship, all that fun stuff, be sure to subscribe. I put at least one video out a week, and I think you'll really like it. Thank you guys so much for subscribing, and now let's get into learning about the gender pay gap. According to the OECD, the gender pay gap is defined as, quote, the difference between median earnings of men and women relative to median earnings of men, end quote. Today, the number is about 17 cents, or in other words, the average woman makes about 83 cents for every dollar a man receives. Now, I want to be clear that this number is a very generalized number and is not very nuanced. The gender pay gap does not account for choices in occupation, rank in an organization, tenure, education level, or hours worked in a week. Now, just because it doesn't take into account those characteristics doesn't mean that there's still not prejudice in the gender pay gap, because there definitely is. So the gender pay gap is just more nuanced than every woman makes 17 cents less than a man does. That's how averages work. Sometimes there's more, sometimes there's less, sometimes there's lots of prejudice, sometimes there's not a lot of prejudice. Let's talk about what these differences mean and how they impact all of us. In 2020, Pew Research did an analysis of the median, aka average, hourly earnings of both full and part-time workers of both genders. They found that the gap between genders has remained relatively stable in the United States over the past 15 years, including as recently as in 2020, where women earned on average 84% of what men earned. But the gender pay gap has improved significantly since the 1980s, where a woman made on average 64 cents for every dollar a man earned. So things have improved a lot since the 80s, but according to these numbers, they're still not identical. Pew concluded that it would take an extra 42 days for women to earn what men did in 2020. Now, to be clear, people's experience with the gender pay gap differs on many factors, such as where they live. Here's a map of the gender pay gap as recorded in the US Census. You can probably see that if we overlay a map of states' political leanings, you can see that conservative states have a higher gender pay gap. Does this mean that these states are actively trying to oppress women and increase the pay gap? Or is it that states that are politically conservative tend to have people who choose certain ways of life that greatly affect the gender pay gap statistic? Foreshadowing. But I'd love to hear what you guys think about this in the comments. On your way down there, you can click on the link in the bio to see what the pay gap is in your state. So, why does the gender pay gap even exist? Let's put 17 cents over here and keep track of what we know causes what. First, we know that the jobs that women tend to work in are not paid as highly as the jobs men tend to work in are. This can be a variable that really screws with our ability to accurately judge the gender pay gap and the amount of discrimination in it, because if you have a bunch of women who decide to go into teaching elementary school, their pay is going to be vastly different than if they were going to go into management consulting or investment banking. Now, is that fair? I mean, I'd love for teachers to get paid more, but as of right now, they don't, and the people who become teachers know that they're not going to get paid a lot. This choice in career affecting the gender pay gap is backed up by the European Commission, who said that, quote, around 24% of the gender pay gap is related to the overrepresentation of women in relatively low-paying sectors such as care, health, and education, end quote. So let's say 4 cents of our 17 cents gap is based off different career path choices. So some of the gender pay gap is based off of career choices, but what about the rest of the gap? Second, women often spend more time on unpaid work than men or spend more time away from work than men. Sometimes this can be a choice. Some women feel called to be full-time moms, and there should be no discrimination against that. My own mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she was absolutely amazing for me. Now, we were blessed that we were able to afford this arrangement, but I can still remember when my teacher in 7th grade asked us to interview a parent about their job, and I asked if it was okay that I interview my mom because my dad was away on a big business trip. And I can still remember her saying that, quote, being a mom is not a real job, end quote. That kind of prejudice, in my opinion, is just not okay. If being a mom is what someone wants to do with their life, great. I think they should be celebrated for that. If someone wants to work in the workforce, great. They should be celebrated for that too. But based off my research, what makes understanding the gender pay gap so hard is that it's really difficult to parse out on a macro scale which women feel called to and choose to take on an unpaid role or take care of the family or work part-time so they can be home with the kids or whatever it is, and which feel coerced by society or their husbands or whoever to take on this role. I don't know what the percent of people who feel coerced versus chosen is, but if you have a source on that, I would love to see that research in the comments below. But according to Pew Research, 29% of mothers were stay-at-home moms. So those zeros in earnings obviously affect the gender pay gap. So let's give an estimate of 5 cents being caused by this reason. And third, as we talked about earlier, the gender pay gap is a very rough average that does not take into account choices in occupation, ranking in an organization, tenure, education level, or hours worked in a week. One reason why the gender pay gap has been decreasing over the last 40 years is because we are seeing these unaccounted for variables change. For example, more and more women are working in business and moving up the ranks of major companies. Although this number is still really small, for example, only 8.8% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women, which is a record and is a great move in the right direction, but it's still probably pretty low, wouldn't you think? But again, let's look a little deeper at why that might be. What's the average age of a CEO? Well, 80% of S&P 500 CEOs are between the ages of 50 and 65. Thus, these CEOs were graduating college between 1979 and 1994. So do you see how the diversity today is affected by social and cultural trends from 30 years ago? Let's just guess that all these factors we just talked about account for 4 cents per dollar. So now we are at women being paid 8 cents less per dollar, which is much better than 17 cents, but still not good. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, discrimination. Simply put, sometimes women get paid less for the same amount of work that their male counterparts do simply because they're women. And yes, gender paid discrimination has been illegal since 1963, but it still happens. Again, this is really hard to measure because if you surveyed all the employers in the US and you asked them, do you pay your women employees less because they're women? What employer in their right mind is going to answer that question truthfully? So what researchers have done is subtract all the other variables that could be affecting the gender wage gap, and what's left is the difference due to discrimination. That's kind of like what we did today, right? According to the American Association of University Women and the US Department of Labor, the pay gap based on discrimination is between 5 and 7 cents. This seemingly small difference can still make a big difference over one's career. Let's say you graduate college at the age of 22 and get a job making $50,000 a year, and work till you retire at 65, getting a 5% pay raise each year. Across your career, you would make $8.3 million in earnings. Whereas if you had added all the same characteristics, but you were paid just 5% less when you started out, you would make $7.8 million across your career, a full $500,000 less. So even a number as small as 5% adds up really quickly. Sexism still exists across our country, whether we're conscious of it or not. Whether it be praising a man for being able to get with all the women while shaming a woman and calling her like a slut for doing the same, or expecting young women to have more self-control because, boys will be boys, or being told in the workplace that, oh, you're too nice for this job and getting passed over for that promotion, or being passed over for promotion because she might have kids soon and she wouldn't want to handle or couldn't handle all that pressure. Sexism is an uncomfortable reality of the world, and I doubt that we will ever fully root it out. But there are some things that we can do to reduce discrimination in the workplace. So what can we do to reduce the gender pay gap? I think one of the easiest ways to reduce the gender wage gap is to increase pay transparency. Whether that's through a law that requires certain job postings to have an expected pay attached to them, or by just normalizing talking about pay and money at work. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, adopting transparent pay practices would reduce the gender pay gap by as much as 30%, because it will be easier for women, or any other marginalized group for that matter, to realize that they're being discriminated against when they see that their peers' pay is different than their own pay. They can then work to address this discrepancy. We can also regularize schedules in the workplace. Unpredictable workplace schedules make it hard for working single mothers to arrange childcare or to get their kids off to school. Of course, there will be some level of unpredictability in the workplace cycle, and some of that is a necessity. But oftentimes variance in schedules are the result of poor planning on managers' parts, or just a lack of consideration on managers' parts. And finally, although these two changes would cost almost nothing to adopt, there is a slightly more expensive option called expanding paid parental leave, but it's really good for both the company and the employee. Let me explain why. When companies don't have adequate parental leave, this can lead to talented women leaving the workforce because giving birth and raising a newborn requires a lot of time and is really hard on your body. You probably know that the USA falls way behind other countries in its unpaid and paid maternity leave. The US is one of only 7 countries in the world that does not require paid maternity leave. If you're wondering why everything looks shaded in this picture, it's because the other 6 countries are Papua New Guinea, Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, Nauru, Palua, and Tonga. So they're kind of hard to see on the map. Now, I'm not saying America needs to become Estonia and offer 84 weeks of paid maternity leave. I'm just saying that we should have a little bit of it. I worked at Goldman Sachs, and Goldman has a 6-month paid maternity leave program. I talked to several women at the company who said that they either chose to work at Goldman in part because they felt like Goldman actually cared about them with this maternity package, or that they just liked the idea that if they had kids, they would get this option. Goldman is getting the higher end talent because they offer this maternity leave package. Many of these women might never even have kids or might move on to another company before they do, but Goldman has a competitive advantage in getting that top talent in part because of their maternity leave program. Honestly, my point here is not even that we have to have government mandated maternity leave. My point is that if you're a leader of a business and you choose to offer a much better maternity package, you will attract better talent and retain that talent. Hopefully this video has helped you better understand the nuances of the gender pay gap, what causes it, and what we can do about it. Since you're still here right now, you probably enjoyed this video, so feel free to give it a like. And if you'd like to see more videos like this about the world of business, finance, entrepreneurship, be sure to subscribe. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys next time.